Welcome to today's recording in our NCD online course on the theme of NCD introductions. We are talking today about NCD research, its history and approaches. Let me give you first an overview.
Now this topic first introduces or gives a brief history of epidemiology, starting from the infectious diseases, then nutritional epidemiology, then we come to NCD, so chronic disease epidemiology. Then we look at the roots at the bottom of modern epidemiology as we have it as a science today. And I give you a list of the different study designs used in chronic disease epidemiology, as you will come across them throughout the course. We have at the end of this module an activity to be done by you, and I listed one essential reading you will find in our resource files. The learning objectives for this topic are to describe the origins of epidemiological research and how chronic disease epidemiology emerged, and then for you to understand the main epidemiological research approaches used in chronic disease research. So let me start to give you a very brief history of epidemiology and how the history shaped our thinking and our current use of methods. And as background, I'll use a very famous painting about the Black Death from Peter Bruegel, painted in the 16th century. And you can guess what diseases dominated then. It wasn't NCDs. Let's look at the factors which influenced epidemiology and made it change over time. Historically, especially in developed countries, there was this marked shift of the leading causes of mortality from infectious disease to chronic disease. And therefore, also you find a shift in research orientation and research methods. At the same time, we observe a fast change in the population structure, as you heard in our session on demography. The fastest segment of the population in developed countries growing is the population above age 75. And the third important point is that virtually all chronic diseases have multiple factors at their origin. So that means the methods investigating those have to be also taking this into account. We actually needed new technologies, statistics, and approaches. Let me give you 3 examples in infectious disease epidemiology. One is Edward Jenner, smallpox vaccine. The next one is John Snow in London, the association between dirty water and cholera. And the last one is the Austrian Ignaz Semmelweis, the link between physicians not washing their hands and transmitting childbed fever from pregnant woman to pregnant women. The reason why I'm pointing out that the research was done before actually the causal agent was defined in all 3 cases is to think about that in chronic disease epidemiology, in NCD epidemiology, we very much focus on trying to identify the causes, but should take a lead from this historical events that actually, without knowing the exact cause, we still can proceed to some action. Here's an illustration of the events John Snow unmasked in London. It's a little bit blurry, but you see that the death dispensary was the drinking water well in a certain region he documented. 2 examples from nutritional epidemiology, James Lind and Joseph Goldberger. James Lind conducted an experiment showing that scurvy could be treated and prevented with eating limes, lemons, and oranges. And actually, James Cook, the seafarer and discovery, took advantage of this early knowledge and basically experimented with that on one of his ships. Vitamin C, ascorbic acid, was discovered only 175 years later. Joseph Goldberger, born in Hungary back then, migrated to the US and identified that pellagra was actually not an infectious disease, but of nutritional origin. And it's very interesting to think about and read about him, how he did this discovery and the mind shift he needed to achieve in the scientific but also in the public health or governmental community. And actually he wasn't very successful on doing that. His quest and discovery and how much that was against the evidence was recently dramatized in a series called The Cure for Pellagra on the Science Channel. And now, examples from chronic disease epidemiology, I list you two. One were the seminal observational studies by Richard Dolb and Hill. And those were the early case control studies around smoking and carcinoma of the lung, published in 1950. So since 1950 we have evidence about this causal relationship, but it took many decades later till we finally acted upon. Another example, cohort studies, a seminal arrangement and study setup was done in 1963, which is now exactly 50 years ago. And that was the study of a whole community. Everybody living in Framingham was invited and registered and to participate and gave a health baseline exam, and since then was examined, I think, every 2 years. It's a longitudinal cohort study, and a lot of exciting and important findings came out of that, especially in the cardiovascular disease area. And last but not least, also in the epidemiology of chronic diseases, we have experimental studies. With that, I don't mean the classic clinical trials, but rather trials run in comparing health services, service delivery, like this one, where there are two approaches tested, and participants, over 10,000 subjects, were randomly assigned to those groups. Either they had some intensive stepped care or what is called their referred care, meaning people were treated as usual through their primary care physicians. And if you look at the table, the mortality difference, 9 out of 100 in the more intensive stepped care against 9.7 out of 100. And you can guess it's not a huge difference. So that explains also why this type of study needs 10,000 or more of participants to demonstrate an effect. But on the other side, this is happening in real practices, primary care of physicians in a large population. So therefore, it's closer to reality than a clinical trial. What are the roots of modern epidemiology? I can summarize that there are at least 6 events or roots. One we already saw. Acute disease investigation was at the cradle of epidemiology, and that gives us the emphasis on the empirical systematic investigation. The methods were derived from that. The second route is in medicine. A lot of early epidemiologists actually were medical doctors. The next route is in, and a younger one is in statistics. Thanks to advanced statistical scientific methods, a lot of new type of research was able to be undertaken. And then since the 60s, many of the epidemiologists, including some of my teachers, were actually statistician of background. Younger then is the addition of social sciences and their methods into epidemiology. And next level are advances in computer science, not only for data collection but also for data visualization and putting us statistical methods at our fingertips, more sophisticated methods to handle large amounts of data and to perform complex analysis. And both are especially necessary, but of course not unique, in chronic disease epidemiology. And the most youngest event is the addition of genomics and its science. Since 2001, the first complete human genome was sequenced and published. So that is another newer dimension now at the roots of modern epidemiology, and also of great importance to chronic disease epidemiology when we look at disease susceptibility genes and the gene environment interaction. So what are the study designs used in chronic disease research? Traditionally, we have ecological studies comparing countries, cross-sectional surveys, case control studies, cohort studies, the clinical trial, which then can be extended to what we saw the example before, a population-based trial or health service-based trial. And more novel, we have case cohort designs, use of registries, use of statistical modeling in epidemiology, and as I said before, the addition of genetic epidemiology, and last but not least, the use of the internet or linkage of database by doing secondary data analysis. So in summary, this topic should have given you a brief introduction about the historical developments and achievements in what started out be strong in infectious disease epidemiology, then nutrition epidemiology, and last but not least, NCD epidemiology. I gave you a couple of key events in this historical brief overview, and I've shown you that the evolution of epidemiological techniques and research designs results now that modern NCD research has a variety of methods available which we need to learn and which we can choose from. Let me finish this segment with giving you a couple of additional resources and an outlook. One, if you want to learn more about epidemiology, I can recommend Ruth Bonita's textbook on epidemiology, which you can find actually on Google, and because it's published, it's available for free, you find at the WHO website, freely to download, an excellent resource. The other resource I wanted to share with you is this website, which is called epidemiolog.net. Here you see the address up there, where you find a lot of different freely available lectures, textbooks, and other resources. And last but not least, I also thought I should point you, for those who are interested in finding out the latest trends in epidemiology, to this recent last December conference held by the NIH in Bethesda, close to Washington, by the National Cancer Institute, where they actually, it's worthwhile browsing through, at the end had a couple of recommendations on how future epidemiology should look like. An interesting set on these recommendations, which were also published just this year in the journal Cancer Epidemiology. And with that, we reached the end of our first outlook in the history of epidemiology.